Welcome to Now in the 90s, where we look at the game releases of 30 years ago today. This week, an ambitious RPG, 3D shades and squirt guns, and the seventh game in a long-running PC series comes to Sega. I'm your host Jared, and today is September 22nd, 1993. An ambitious RPG from one of the kings of 16-bit RPGs, released this week in 1993 for the Super Nintendo, was the Seventh Saga. The Seventh Saga is a turn-based RPG. Pick one of 7 characters from the start and travel the world to collect runes for the king. Battles are classic turn-based style with attacks, magic, and items. Talk to NPCs in town, purchase items and equipment, and get experience points to level up. Find other characters to join your party, explore dangerous dungeons, and get ready to reload your save over and over and over again. The Seventh Saga was published by Enix, the other SNES RPG company. It did some really cool things for the time. For example, it uses the SNES Mode 7 graphics to transition into and out of battles, making it seem like they are taking place literally right there where you are in the world. Not only can you pick any of the 7 characters at the start, they'll be doing the same quest as you are as you play. This means you can potentially convince them to join you, and sometimes they'll end up being rivals you'll have to fight. But you can also find the runes in any order and get tons of replayability with all the different characters. It also has a real-time radar in the corner. It lets you have a better idea of where to find landmarks like towns and dungeons, but also give you a general idea of where enemies are roaming. It was a turn-based RPG that allowed you to avoid random battles, which you'll likely do more often than not because this game is impossibly difficult. For whatever reason, when localizing the Seventh Saga for a Western release, someone decided it should be frustratingly hard. Enemies are stronger. Whatever character you pick is weaker, and your rivals all level up faster than you do. No joke, I've never gotten past the first town in this game because it made me want to actually cry. Not that you would know that based on any coverage that it got. Previews were non-existent, aside from the one in Nintendo Power issue 52, where it gave a few pages with a world map. Magazine advertisements just touted how much people liked the game. It focused more on the positive reviews, the amazing graphics, and how it's a 60+ hour RPG on a whopping 12 meg cartridge. And reviewers did generally like it. Nintendo Power awarded it an average score of a 3.6 out of 5, with the negatives being bad translation and confusing clues. Electronic Gaming Monthly graded it on an average score of a 7.6 out of 10 and saying that Soul Blazer fans should play it? No one said anything about the game being clunky to control and so hard you'll ask the store for a refund. Not that it sold super well anyway. The Seventh Saga is something of a cult classic these days, but it's not a highly sought after nostalgia piece. Since then, Enix has been merged with Square to become Square Enix. Much like a lot of their 90s original games, the Seventh Saga has never been re-released or ported to anything else. Speaking of cult classics, look no further than one of the most overlooked multiplayer games of the day. Also released this week was Zombies Ate My Neighbors for the Super NES and the Sega Genesis.
They're coming to your neighborhood.
You're not the pizza guy.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors! Now playing on Sega Genesis and Super NES, a 55-level feeding frenzy of prime-cut creature features, fend off bee-moving maniacs with your weed whackers, exploding soda pop, and oozy squirt gun. Save the neighbors! Or they're dead meat. Zombies Ate My Neighbors from Konami.
Zombies Ate My Neighbors is a top-down shooter. Play as either kids Zeke or Julia and save all your wacky neighbors from hordes of outlandish zombies. Your weapons are everyday household objects like squirt guns, soda cans, popsicles, and fire extinguishers. Go through dozens of levels, fight gigantic bosses, and do it all in glorious 2-player co-op. Zombies Ate My Neighbors was published by Konami and developed by LucasArts, one of only 2 games shared between the two. It wasn't showcased to the public until the 1993 Summer Consumer Electronics Show, where Electronic Gaming Monthly previewed it with a lot of excitement. Nintendo Power also showed it off in issue 51 with a few pages, with the first one explaining what all the different items do, which frankly is what I needed the most because I could never remember them all. That preview was a little overshadowed by Street Fighter II Turbo. Despite the fun atmosphere, silly music, and overly cartoony graphics, Zombies Ate My Neighbors ended up getting a lot of censorship. courtesy of Big Daddy Nintendo. They demanded that all blood be removed, instead changed to purple slime, and in other regions, the chainsaw guys were changed to lumberjacks. The Sega Genesis version was ported halfway through development of the SNES version, but if you game over in that game, you still get a screen full of red blood. It's a good month for violence on the Genesis. Either way, this game rules. It's super fun, has some catchy music, and the 2-player mode is great. Nintendo Power gave positive remarks and some pretty high scores. GamePro magazine also gave some really high scores in every category, and Electronic Gaming Monthly gave it 9 out of 10, along with the Editor's Choice Platinum Award and the Game of the Month. But it didn't catch on. It wasn't until word of mouth began to spread a few years later that Zombies Ate My Neighbors started getting a following. Still, LucasArts tried to follow it up 1 year later with a sequel titled Ghoul Patrol, but that one performed even worse since people didn't realize it was even a successor to Zombies. At least now, people know how fun it is. Zombies Ate My Neighbors and Ghoul Patrol were both re-released in the same collection for Nintendo Switch, PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and on Steam. Also, do you remember in 2011 when it was announced that they were making a movie based on the game? Nothing ever came from that. You probably don't know his name, you've probably never even played his games, but you've probably seen this guy around before. Released this month 30 years ago, was Fantastic Dizzy for the Sega Genesis and the Game Gear. Fantastic Dizzy is a side-scrolling platformer. Play as Dizzy the Egg, searching the entire game for all 250 stars hidden throughout. Collect keys and other various items for puzzle solving, but beware because unlike other platformers, Dizzy has no way of defeating enemies. There are no levels, the whole thing is one long adventure. Find all the stars and defeat the evil wizard Zax and save the Yoke Folk. Fantastic Dizzy was developed and published by Codemasters. The series began life on computers in 1987, where the series mostly stayed aside from a few NES releases and then this Sega port. Most of them are this same kind of gameplay, though there are a couple of puzzle and more arcadey games in the franchise. You might be a little more familiar with Dizzy for the NES because it was an unlicensed game that came in a gold cartridge. Not this one exactly, but you get the idea. This Sega Genesis game, Fantastic Dizzy, is pretty much an upgraded port of that. Reviewers at the time were not super impressed. Electronic Gaming Monthly thought it was fine with middling scores, and GamePro magazine was more negative with lower scores and pretty much called it a baby game for babies. Still, don't underestimate Dizzy fans. The original creators of the series, Philip and Andrew Oliver, are still making new Dizzy games to this day. This includes some new limited NES releases, and the most recent one, Wonderful Dizzy, was released in 2020 for the ZX Spectrum. With every other single release this week, he's just as dizzy. Here's Editor Dylan.
Up yours. Make 7. I might have done that backwards. Anyway, Cool Spot released on the Game Gear this week, starring the mascot for 7-Up, or as I call them, the Sprite of the 90s. And you know the Game Gear drill by now. It's a zoomed-in version of the Genesis game, just like Chuck Rock II, son of Chuck, which also released on Genesis. You play as Chuck's son in this one, Bam Bam. Okay, that's not his name, but it might as well be. He's a cave baby with a club. Actually, I don't know his name. It doesn't specify anywhere that his name is actually Chuck Jr., but if I had to give him one, it'd probably be, I don't know, Huck? Yeah, Huck Rock. I don't think I need to say anything else that you can't already discern from the footage. It's just another drop in the bucket of overused ideas, complete with bosses consisting of balls. Remind you of anything? That's right, Joe and Cheese. But despite that, it's still a decent game, and I do have a soft spot for punny names like Brick Jagger, Bird Reynolds, Eric. The Wizard of Oz for the SNES has a bit of a reputation for being just the worst. But after so many sports games, mediocre platformers, and phoned-in licensed games I played for this show, how bad could it really be? Bad is how bad it could be. But let's move on to our last game this week with Rolling Thunder 3 for the Genesis. Apparently this game is based on a popular arcade series, but I've never played any of them. Upon booting it up, it kinda reminds me of the side-scrolling sections of Golgo 13 on the NES. It's like a run and gun with the pacing of a beat-em-up, only on one linear plane, sometimes two. But there are so many details that set it apart from other games in the genre that really make it stand out. So much so that I'm gonna list off a few of them right after I nonchalantly walk towards this button over here to trigger the Hidden Gem Alert. Rapid fire reasons this game kicks ass. There's a plethora of different weapons to choose from at the start of each level, from bazookas to flamethrowers to freaking laser beams. There are actual well-animated cutscenes between levels. In a Genesis game, the characters all have that classic 90s anime charm with campy dialogue. The main bad guy is just Piccolo. With a monocle? There are vehicle sections that have you riding a motorcycle, a jet ski, and technically a plane, but I don't think it counts. It bears repeating. Piccolo with a monocle! You could hide in the background for cover instead of trying to moon jump or marine crawl under bullets. Hard mode has you go through the game as a badass chick in frankly impractical business attire, complete with high heels. Piccolo monocle! But each level even looks different since it canonically takes place at a different time of day. The soundtrack is pretty decent as well, so kudos to Rose and, Did I mention Piccolo wears a monocle? 10 games released on these 3 consoles this week in 1993. I'm getting a little irritated that most hidden gems I've come across so far are from Namco. Yo Bando Namco, can you release a compilation that doesn't just have 10 different versions of Pac-Man? Like, how many arcade 1-up machines have Pac-Man in them? 16! And you can't be bothered to put one little ROM of Great Greed or Rolling Thunder 3 in any Namco collection? At least put a monocle on Piccolo in the next Dragon Ball game, you cowards! Okay, I'm getting lightheaded. I'm gonna lay down.
Thank you, Dylan. Now I'm dizzy. Here in the Collector's Corner, the Seventh Saga is one of the few SNES RPGs that isn't $1 billion. The game alone currently goes for $35, with a complete box copy at $115. Fantastic Dizzy's value has gone rotten. It released costing $49.95, and now you can get the Sega cartridge for just $14, and a complete one is only double that. The Game Gear version is a bit more impressive at $165 complete though. Zombies Ate My Neighbors released with a price of $59.95. The Sega Genesis version goes for $20 loose and $40 complete, while the SNES version currently goes for $26 for a loose copy and $100 for a complete in box one. However, this week's biggest value gainer is the Zombies Ate My Neighbors variant box art. A Majesco re-release published after the ESRB was created. The cart is the same, but the boxed version goes for $2,035. And that's it for today. Next week, an obscure cartoon gets an obscure game, a colorful, weirdly named platformer, and the Sega Genesis gets that Champion Edition. I'm your host, Jared, and this was Now in the 90s. Thank you so much for watching Now in the 90s. I want to thank some patrons like Salty Snacks, Samuel Allen, and Crooning Wolf. Please like the video and leave a comment down below, especially if you played any of the games we mentioned this week, and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you already are a subscriber, thank you so much for watching this show every single Friday. And don't forget to ring the bell and turn on notifications for all. Did you know there are multiple settings? All and personalized? And personalized basically means you'll see none of them. Make sure it's set to all. There are some times where people ask me about what games have always ever scared me, and one I keep going back to is, as a child, Zombies Ate My Neighbors scared me. Why? Because of that damn baby boss. It's still horrific. The way it moves.